Think about every decision that led to this moment, every choice your parents made, every city they lived in, every person they happened to meet. Go back further, their parents, their grandparents, every single ancestor stretching back through thousands of years of human history. Every one of them had to survive long enough to have children. Every single one. If even one of them had died a single day too early, you would not exist. Not a different version of you, not a weaker version of you, nothing. You would simply never have happened. Now here is what nobody tells you. There was a moment in human history when almost all of them died at once. Around 70,000 years ago, something happened that nearly deleted the entire human species from the face of the earth. Not a war, not a disease, not a slow decline over centuries, a single catastrophic event that may have reduced the entire human population on Earth to somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 individuals. Think about what that number means. There are sports stadiums that hold more people than the entire surviving human race at that moment. Every single person alive on Earth today, all 8 billion of us, descended from that tiny group of survivors. You are here because they made it. And the story of how they made it is one of the most extraordinary things that has ever happened on this planet. The event was a volcano, but not a volcano like anything your brain is picturing right now. On the island of Sumatra, in what is now Indonesia, a supervolcano called Toba erupted with a force that dwarfs anything in recorded human history. Researchers like Stanley Ambrose have spent decades piecing together what happened. The Toba eruption was not 10 times bigger than a normal volcanic eruption, not 100 times bigger. It was estimated to be approximately 5,000 times more powerful than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which itself was one of the most destructive volcanic events of the 20th century. It ejected somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 cubic kilometers of ash and debris into the atmosphere. To put that into a visual your brain can actually hold, imagine filling a cube the size of a small mountain range with ash and rock and fire and launching all of it simultaneously into the sky. The immediate destruction was total. Entire ecosystems across South and Southeast Asia were buried under meters of volcanic ash within days. But the immediate eruption was not even the worst part. The worst part came after. The ash and sulfur dioxide that Toba launched into the upper atmosphere blocked sunlight across the entire planet. Not for a day, not for a week, for years, possibly for a decade. Temperatures dropped globally by somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius on average, with some regions experiencing drops of up to 15 degrees. Researchers call this a volcanic winter. Crops failed, forests died, animal populations collapsed, and the small scattered groups of early modern humans living across Africa, who were already surviving in a difficult and unpredictable world, suddenly found themselves facing conditions that made everything that had come before look manageable. Geneticist Lynn Jord was one of the first researchers to connect the genetic evidence to this catastrophe. When scientists began mapping the diversity of human DNA in the late 20th century, they discovered something deeply strange. Humans, despite being spread across every continent on Earth and existing in enormous numbers, have remarkably low genetic diversity compared to almost every other large primate species. A single group of chimpanzees living in one forest in West Africa has more genetic variation among themselves than the entire 8 billion human population of Earth. Think about that for a second. That is not what you would expect from a species that has been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years. It is exactly what you would expect from a species that was almost completely wiped out. The genetic data points to a severe population bottleneck occurring somewhere around 70,000 years ago. A bottleneck is what happens when a population is reduced so dramatically that almost all genetic variation is lost. The survivors carry only a tiny fraction of the genetic diversity that existed before. And when that small group expands again, every future generation carries only the genetics of those survivors. You carry the genetics of those survivors. Every human being alive today does. But here is where the story stops being about disaster and starts being about something else entirely, because those survivors did not just endure. They did something that no other species facing the same conditions had ever done before. They adapted. And the way they adapted changed the course of life on this planet forever. The humans who survived the Toba bottleneck were not the biggest. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. What they had, which no other animal on Earth possessed to the same degree, was the ability to cooperate with strangers. Anthropologist Joseph Henrich has argued extensively that what makes humans unique is not raw intelligence. It is our ability to share knowledge across individuals and across generations. While other animals can learn from their parents, humans can accumulate knowledge collectively. One person discovers something, teaches it to 10 people, who each teach it to 10 more, and suddenly an entire group possesses knowledge that no single individual could have developed alone. In the brutal volcanic winter that followed Toba, this ability became the difference between survival and extinction. Groups that shared food survived longer than groups that hoarded it. Groups that shared knowledge of where water could be found survived longer than groups that kept it secret. Groups that could coordinate hunts across multiple individuals brought down larger prey and fed more mouths. The volcanic winter did not just nearly destroy the human species, it may have been the pressure that forced human social cooperation to reach a level of sophistication that no previous environment had demanded. And there is evidence suggesting that the survivors did not stay in one place. Genetic and archaeological data suggests that after the bottleneck, a small group of humans made one of the most consequential journeys in the history of life on Earth. They left Africa. The exact timing is debated among researchers, but somewhere between 60,000 and 70,000 years ago, a group of anatomically modern humans crossed out of Africa, possibly through the Arabian Peninsula when sea levels were lower, and began spreading across the rest of the world. Every non-African human alive today descends from that single migration event, not multiple migrations. One, a single group of people, themselves the descendants of the Toba survivors, walked out of Africa and eventually populated every continent on Earth except Antarctica. Think about what that means for you personally. If you have any ancestry outside of Africa, you descend from a group of people who were themselves the children and grandchildren of the survivors of the most catastrophic population collapse in human history. They lived through a volcanic winter. They rebuilt from a population that may have been small enough to fit in a single neighborhood. And then they walked to the other side of the world. There is something else the genetic data reveals that is almost too strange to process, because the bottleneck was so severe and the founding population for the out-of-Africa migration was so small. Every non-African human alive today shares a surprisingly recent common ancestor. Research by statisticians like Douglas Rode has suggested that the most recent common ancestor of all humans alive today lived far more recently than most people intuitively expect. Not hundreds of thousands of years ago, possibly as recently as just a few thousand years ago. Somewhere in the world, not very long ago in historical terms, there lived a person who is the direct ancestor of every single human being now alive. You are more connected to every other person on this planet than you have ever been told. So go back to where we started. Every decision, every chance encounter, every ancestor who survived long enough. Go back 70,000 years to a small group of humans huddled in the darkness of a volcanic winter. The ash still falling, the temperature still dropping. The world they had known now buried and silent. They did not know they were the last ones. They did not know that everything depended on them. They just survived the next day, and then the next. And then they had children, and those children had children. And somewhere down that impossibly long chain of survival and chance and stubbornness, you appeared. The next time someone tells you that your existence was inevitable, you can tell them exactly how wrong they are. You are the result of the most improbable survival story in the history of life on this planet. And the fact that you are here, reading this, breathing right now, is the most extraordinary thing that has happened in 70,000 years.